and welcome back to the Simplifiers podcast, where we take topics in business and in life and simplify them. And well, so here's the thing, guys. We have had one of those years, 2020. Can we just get a redo? I don't know. It's been a year of big, massive change. And, you know, a lot of things that come with change, unfortunately, is trauma, is grief, is a whole lot of shaking up the virtual etch-a-sketch of our lives and trying to figure out all the pieces and rebuild and reorient. So I wanted to bring somebody on to share her story of big, massive changes in her life and what she learned in that process. That person is Stephenie Zamora. She is the author, and she's also a life coach, a business and marketing strategist, and a founder of her own digital media and production company. Her and her team at Stephenie Zamora Media have been merging the worlds of personal development, digital media, and online marketing to help individuals build purpose-driven lives and businesses for nearly a decade. Now, you're going to learn so much about her and truly see that her work helps catalyze individuals on their healing and growth journeys so that they can uncover the purpose of their path, step into who they're here to be, and do the work they're here to do. So I'd like to welcome to the Simplifiers podcast, Stephenie Zamora. Hey, Steph.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh, Stephenie, I'm so glad you're here. And I read your book. It's called Unravel, which we'll put the link in the show notes if anybody wants any of the leaks from what we talk about today. It's found at thesimplifierspodcast.com. And you have such an epic story. You are, it's incredible. Like, you are the epitome of the going insane of like, well, you've survived 100% of your worst days so far, so keep going. And I should say as well, Stephenie, right at the top, we're recording this on April 7th, 2020. We are in the middle of a global pandemic where every week things are different. And gosh, it is changing rapidly. Would you tell us a little bit about your backstory and give us the high-level overview of what you've been through so far before also surviving a pandemic?
Yeah, so I put a lot of this in Unravel, but essentially I had spent many years building up a business that I was really proud of. So I had built this business that was thriving. I had an amazing team. I was making such good money. And I think all entrepreneurs know this, is to have multiple months in advance of your income is like a huge deal.
Yeah.
And this was the end of 2014. And so everything was really moving in a good direction. And I felt like I really knew who I was and what I was doing. And ended a 2-year relationship with a man that I loved, but who was no longer right for me. And he began to stalk me. And when I set a really clear boundary of, you know, please stop showing up, you can't come around anymore, he ended up committing suicide a couple days later. And it absolutely flattened me. Like, there are not enough words to describe what that feeling was like, and had PTSD pretty severely after that. Yeah. So badly that I would drive in circles around my house, because in the time that it took me to lap the block, I would forget that I was going home. I couldn't put my own life story in order. I didn't know who half my clients were. Thank goodness for my business manager keeping me on track. And my business just came to a halt. It was like, energetically, even if you came to me and said, hey, I want to give you a bunch of money, how do I do that? By me telling you where to send the money, I would just like push you away energetically. Like, I just was not there anymore. I had no sense of what was going on. And so the PTSD led me into a toxic and abusive relationship with someone who I would have claimed at the time was the love of my life, because I was cracked so far open that the way that I loved him was just like not relevant to this life and what was healthy. And again, like I said, my business failed. It flatlined. I went through a lot of health issues that were unexpected. I didn't know that this was very common after grief and trauma, but I had pretty severe adrenal fatigue. I had back and hip pain so severe that lying down, sitting, standing, walking, all of it was really, really painful for me. And ultimately, I stopped swallowing for 9 days. So for 9 long days, I couldn't swallow even my own saliva. I had to get an IV, and it was horrible and terrifying. And it was nearly a year before I could eat and drink normally.
Yeah. And so let's just pause there for a second, because when I was reading the book and I'm like, hang on, what? You couldn't swallow for 9 days? It's so heartbreaking when I read this in your book, and your book is beautiful and hard. Like hard. But when I read this about your journey and just realized, like, gosh, how incredible our physical human bodies are to try to shield us from pain and heartbreak. And in that, sometimes it means that they absolutely shut down. Your physical body shut down. Were you experiencing that?
Yeah. And so it was a result both of the trauma, like the PTSD is the way that our brain protects us, and it's a mode that we go into. But the swallowing was ultimately my body screaming at me that you cannot swallow your truth anymore. Like, you cannot be in situations where you can't be all of you and you can't speak your truth, because I was in an abusive and a toxic relationship because of the PTSD. And it was my body's way of saying, like, no more.
Yeah.
You have to speak up, or I will keep you from being able to swallow.
Yeah. And so I want to read actually a little bit from your book, if that's okay. Sure. So in the foreword is her name Juna Mastad?
Yes.
So Juna is a intuitive coach and was an early mentor for you as well. And I just loved what she said here. So she put this in page 13 of your book. Simply put, most humans totally suck at being with their pain. Most of us are truly inept at sitting with anything uncomfortable, from the physical pain of an injury to the emotional pain of a breakup. We've developed tried and true methods that, in the blink of an eye, take us away from what we deem uncomfortable and promise a few moments of reprieve from our pain, trauma, heartbreak, or emotions. The truth is, being human means that we will experience pain, grief, and challenges. And as you know, the more you avoid your pain, the more it festers and grows until it finally rises up from the depths with a fiery intensity that strong arms you into facing it. So we need roadmaps to help us consciously navigate this inner territory. I love how she talks about that, and really, truly, your book reads as a memoir. So I'm right there beside you through some very horrific things that have happened in your life. But then I also see the places of healing and like you say, like being cracked wide open, split into two in order to, move on and move up and out of this. Gosh, what do you hear when you hear those words from Juna?
Yeah. And I, thank goodness for Juna. She was really a savior. And I think the power of mentors when we're going through these challenging chapters and big life transitions are so, so important. And I agree with her wholeheartedly. We develop all of these coping mechanisms. And a quote that I love is by Jordan Gray. And he says that if we ignore our emotions or stuff them down, we're basically sending them down into the basement to lift weights.
Yeah.
They don't go away. So we can try to bypass, we can try to stuff them down, we can activate all of our coping techniques, but it's still getting stored in our body. And at some point we will crack. And that cracking looks different for all of us. Some of us get sick. Some of us have a nervous breakdown, panic attacks, anxiety. We have physical ailments that we think are just, oh, I'm busy and I'm stressed and I'm old. And it's like, no, it's we're stuffing our emotions, and it's literally embedding it into our cells. And so it's so important to bring awareness to them and to feel our way through and to do the growth and healing work, but it is not easy at all.
Yeah. And I'm just imagining, so many of our listeners, and even you and I as well, there's going to be a level of trauma that we need to work through because of what's going on with the coronavirus. That this is such a mass shakeup on a global level for so many of us that I imagine, whether it's, a month from now, 6 months from now, or even 3 or 4 years from now, we will all collectively be working through the grief and trauma of what's happening like right now. Yes. We're in the thick of it. That I remember you said something early on in the book, that early in your grief, you prayed a prayer and sent it high to the heavens, like, use me up and spit me out. What did that mean for you?
It was really a choice of, if I have to go through this horrible and horrific experience, let it be for some greater good. And it wasn't this conscious choice necessarily. It was in those moments of deep grief, which I think are such powerful places that we don't allow ourselves to go. but it was about purpose, and purpose is my purpose. I'm so passionate about purpose. And so it was very much, if I have to go through this, let it be for a reason. Like, use me up and spit me out. I want to serve. I'm very service oriented, which I imagine a lot of your listeners are.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be able to, I was making the choice that I will go through this and use me. Like, how can I help others because of this? And it was never really conscious as a result of that, but I started sharing. So I started writing on social media, which I went from being very strategic in my posting and sharing, right? Building a business and being an entrepreneur, to it was just like, and it wasn't even, there's a fine line. I feel like it wasn't even just kind of like venting and dumping on social media, but it was like I would have these experiences and I would have these moments and I would learn different things and I would write about them. And it felt very much like channeling after I had really like made that request and sent it up to the heavens or the universe. It was like things would just come through me and they felt like they were as much for me as they were for other people. And it stopped being strategic. And that was just the start of it. And I feel like the book is the ultimate ending of that. But it was very much like, if we're going to go through something hard, let's choose for it to be for a purpose and for it to give meaning and to, in some way, give back to others.
And so, given your own experience with, this horrible thing that happened prior to the pandemic, but also where you are right now, present day today, like what are you using? What are tools that are helping you process the gunk and the horribleness right now?
Yes, that's such a great question. And what you said before these two questions about we're all standing in the middle of a collective trauma and just a ton of grief. Yeah. And so one of my tools is emotions, feeling my feelings. And it's something that we don't want to let ourselves do. And it's something that's really hard for a lot of us to do right now because a lot of people have their kids at home. They are trying to run or salvage a business. And it's just, there's so much going on, and our energetic bandwidth is so much more taxed right now. So it's not that it's easy, but I am a big advocate of feeling my feelings all the way through. Whether that is in grief, has a lot of emotion that comes with it, and as does trauma. So if I'm angry, I let myself be angry. If I'm sad and there's not a good reason, it doesn't matter. I just let myself be sad. I have a good cry at least once a day, especially after updating myself on what's going on in the world. I let myself be exactly where I am. And there's an art to this. So we don't, again, want to stuff it. We don't also want to dwell in it. And most importantly, we don't want to tell ourselves stories about it. Like we make it bigger and worse than it is, or we keep ourselves stuck and swirling in it. If we do these things, like we just let it be. Emotions are just energy in motion. They're all normal and healthy, and we can use them in really powerful ways. But that is one of my biggest tools and resources, is to feel my feelings all the way through and then go back to the basics for you. For me, that's writing. If I'm not writing, something's wrong. So I write in my journal, I write and I create and I share it with the world. I go on walks. I get myself into nature where I can while being socially distant. I talk to the humans that I trust and that I love and that know me best. I read the books that like center me. So it's like, go back to the basics for you. I do some meditation, exercise, like whatever they are for you that remind you, this is who I am. Yeah. Even though everything is crazy and wild right now, what are those little practices that remind you of who you are and who you're trying to be in the world and just ground you? And they're different for all of us.
Yeah. And I really am so appreciative you are saying this now, because it reminds me actually of a recent conversation I had with Adam Wilder, episode 114. I'll put the link in the show notes for everybody if you want to go back and listen to that one. He's the head of Togetherness, the Togetherness movement in London. And he actually said the same thing. And so it's nice to hear other thought leaders like yourself who, validate the fact that all emotions are valid and equal and need to be felt. Like you can't just dampen down and push down anger or grief or sadness and just good vibes only, pretend everything's great and put a veneer on it. Like, he was also saying that it is so critically important to feel all the feels, to be in that space, but then move on. Yeah, so it sounds like that's part of your daily practice and one of your big ahas.
And don't judge how you move your emotions. I know people who scream into pillows. I had a person in my life that would go to the river and yell as loud as he could into the rapids. People like to throw things like be safe, obviously, but you're allowed to move your emotions and it doesn't make you crazy or wrong or bad. It's so, so important.
Yeah. And I mean, it makes me wonder, so if you do have these big emotions that are bubbling up, and you're absolutely right, it's so tricky if you've got kids at home or homeschooling or other people around. Like, how do you balance that big emotion and feeling that comes with big change? What else is working for you?
I think it's really important to balance. So for one, especially if you have kids and a partner at home, and so you're not alone anymore, maybe like you used to be before, find those pockets and those spaces to be able to do that. I am fortunate that I have 2 cats and it's just me. So I am self-isolating all by myself so I can move between the emotions as I need to. But if you can't do that, find the time. That might mean getting up at 4 a.m. and giving yourself an hour to go for a walk or to sit in the closet and cry. And I know it seems sad and it makes you feel weird because it's not part of our normal day-to-day to have this many emotions. And so give yourself the space to do that and know who your people are who can hold space for it. It's challenging right now because we're all going through a lot of different emotions and we all have our own stresses and grief and trauma that we're trying to process. But who are the people that you can reach out to and say, I'm spinning, I just need a minute to vent. Like, I just need to let it all out and get it out and be heard. I don't need a fix. I don't need to be corrected. Who are the people that you can do that with? And if you don't have them in your life, know that there are a lot of places online that you can do that. There are a lot of groups, even just on Facebook, where you can get with community who's grieving or who's been through trauma or who is a struggling entrepreneur. There are people out there that will hold space for you. And it's just make the time for it. And also give yourself grace if you're in the middle of cooking dinner and you're sobbing. Have those conversations with your partner or your kids. You don't have to go into the scary stuff with kids, but it's okay to say, there's a lot going on and I'm feeling sad and sadness is okay. And this is how I let it off and let it out and move it.
Yeah, it's funny. It's not funny, actually. That exact thing happened to me about 2 days ago. There was just a day I was feeling really low and very sad. And, there's so much that is changing and fluctuating. And I'm relatively a positive, optimistic person. But I remember in that moment, the kids were like, oh, are you okay? Is everything okay? And my daughter, who's 11, immediately went to the place of like, well, I need to tell her jokes and fix this and like cheer her up. And I said, honey, Zoe, I don't need you to fix me. Like, I just, sometimes mommy's sad and that's okay. And I felt afterwards like it was the right choice, like to not just like try to hide away my emotional spectrum, but just to be able to say to our children of like, hey, it's okay to be sad sometimes. And also an hour later to be full of joy. And that all of those feelings and emotions are valid.
It teaches them emotional intelligence, which is so important right now in general, but especially at a time like now.
Yeah. So what wisdom do you think can be found in your anger? Like tapping into your anger. What have you found and how have you used this energy and insight for good?
Yes, I love anger. And I think especially as women, we're not taught that we're allowed to be angry, right? People think that we're the B word. I don't know if I'm allowed to swear, but we're seen as an angry woman or hysterical. And so we're never taught to express our emotions as well as men. But as a whole, anger is something that we're afraid of because, again, we're never taught how to relate to it, that it's normal and healthy and how to move it in a healthy way. And what I love about anger, which took me a while to learn, is it shows me what my values are and where my boundaries are and when they've been violated and when I am no longer willing or able to tolerate something. And so with anger, it gives us all of this insight into all of those things. But additionally, when you learn to work with your emotions, you can transmute that energy from I am angry at you in this situation onto a bigger global scale. And so I love it when people get ranty because they are angry. And some people don't like it because they're not in touch with their own anger. But when I hear my clients or my friends or my family get mad and ranty, they are the most rooted in their wisdom and their purpose. Like they just lay it down. Everything comes through clearly. So if you're feeling stuck and stagnant, I would invite you to tap into, where am I angry? What am I angry about right now? And so we hide anger, we mask it with other emotions a lot of the times. And anger can also mask deeper emotions like sadness as well, or grief or heartache, all of those hard emotions that we don't want to deal with. So when you tap into your anger, first, look for the insight. Don't make it bad and wrong. Don't make other people bad or wrong. Just look at, oh, here's a boundary that got crossed that I'm not okay with. Here's something that I'm tolerating that I don't want to tolerate anymore. Or this value is being compromised right now. I'm out of integrity. This person is out of integrity. And then see if you can expand it beyond that. And so what happens for me is I can see, and this is not to excuse other people's bad behavior, you can see why people behave the way they do, right? Like a lot of the unfortunate and not so great aspects of relationships are a result of someone else's trauma or wounding or society and how we approach things, or a belief system that is flawed or flawed logic.
Yeah.
And it's not, again, to excuse people who do bad things, but it helps us expand it to, like, they are a result and a byproduct of something that's not right in the world, something that I disagree with. And when we can do that, it can help us be more productive in resolving the situation in front of us, but it gets us into our genius zone and we get fired up and we tap into our purpose and we can actually go out and make a change that we weren't able to make before. So I love anger, and I have really grown my relationship to it in a really productive and powerful way.
And yeah, I can, what I hear there is when you give yourself permission to feel it, like genuinely get in it and not just, numb it or push it aside or pretend it doesn't exist, like actually get in it and feel it and process it, then there is clarity that comes from it as well, right?
Yes. Yes, and it does of all emotions. So a good practice is when you feel your first level of emotion, whether it's anger or sadness or something else, let it wash over you. Let yourself feel it fully and be immersed in it. And it just let it consume you. And then see if you can drop into or beneath it and see what's there. And you'll start to see that there are these layers to our emotions. Yeah. And when we're able to drop and move through them, we're able to get all the insight and wisdom from them. But we're also able to drop down and tap into our truth and our source. But we're never taught to let alone feel them, but that we have control of them. We can move them, we can work with them, we can manipulate them, we can open them and see what's beneath them. So really developing this relationship, it gives you so much more resource and so much more insight and wisdom that you didn't even realize that you had.
But it's scary, Stephenie. It's really scary. When you actually pull back the Wizard of Oz curtain in your life and in your emotional well-being, and you realize that there's so much that's fragile deep down inside, when you actually go and do the work to excavate all of the muck, it's scary and hard. What would you say to that person who says that?
It's supposed to be. I know that it doesn't make it any easier, but we really, as a society, need to learn that we are capable of doing hard things, and that it's not supposed to be pretty. So we think that healing and growth are supposed to be pretty and inspiring, and they're not.
Yeah.
And they are not supposed to be, because when we deepen into this work, especially because, and I feel like all of this, again, purpose is my purpose, is about uncovering who we are and who we're here to be, what we're here to contribute on a deeper and deeper level. So there's a quote out there that's, the goal of life isn't finding yourself, it's creating yourself. And I would argue it's neither. It's remembering who you've always been at your core.
Yeah.
And so as we do this work, and as we do the scary work of just even feeling our feelings a little more deeply and fully than we ever have before, it's terrifying because we're so afraid of the very things that we want. Yeah. We're so afraid of our truth. We're so afraid of understanding ourselves better and getting clear on what it is that we want. Even though on a conscious level, we're saying, I want to know who I am and I want to heal and I want to grow, because it asks us to step away from everything known and familiar. This triggers our subconscious programming and our subconscious mind to freak out. And so anytime we do things different, or we do a little more growth, or we do a little more healing, or we tap a little deeper into our emotions and start getting the insight and wisdom, we are challenging everything known and familiar. And to our subconscious mind, that is certain death. Like, it cannot have it, and it will do everything in its power to get you to go back to how you were before. So to stuff the feelings, to bypass them, to just, I love my life as it is. I don't want to change. And we hit what's called the terror barrier. And so we have like normal ups and downs as we go through life. We start feeling our feelings more, doing the growth and healing work, and everything goes like this. And it feels like we're doing it wrong and we're not capable of it because we don't know that that's what's supposed to happen. Like we are trying to rewire our subconscious and create a new way of being in the world. We're trying to deepen into who we are and make the changes we need to make, and our subconscious can't handle it. So we start to tell ourselves stories that I'm not cut out for it, or it's too hard, I can't do this, when really we just have to ride the waves and keep doing the work to get to the other side. But so, yeah, I would say it's supposed to be hard. I'm really sorry that it is. I know how much it sucks. Yeah. And it doesn't mean that you're doing it wrong. It means that you're doing it right. It's supposed to be hard and messy and challenging, and it's supposed to scare you to death as you do it. And eventually you come out the other side and things settle a bit. It doesn't mean that they're comfortable yet, but they settle a bit. So I know that's not the best answer of here's how to make it easy, but
yeah. Well, no, I hear that. And I really appreciate you speaking into that, because I think a lot of us as humans want to take the easy route. We want the 5 tips to get to clarity, and then we can get back to our beautiful Instagram grid of perfectly filtered pictures and pretend that life is fine. And I'm fine. Everything's fine. I'm fine. But that is actually a hope of mine in this horrific place we are all in globally right now, of life being upside down, social systems seeing the fragility of it all, and loss that quite a few people are going to face either in their families or immediately in their friend circle. My hope is that when we come out of this, 30 days from now, 6 months from now, 5 years from now, we will stop the insanity of trying to put a veneer and a perfect filter and project some sort of, my life is so amazing, but actually in reality I'm crumbling. That we all do. We all do it. And that there is a deeper level of authenticity, but honesty as well, internally first, but then with our people, whether it's our family, our friends, our clients, or the greater world beyond. What's your hope as we get out of this and we move on to whatever the next season of our life will be?
Yes, I love that. It's very similar to yours. I feel like we're standing in the middle of a collective awakening.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people that are being thrust into it against their will. So if your income or business has been impacted, if you've lost your job, if you are sick, or you know someone who is sick, or you've lost somebody, it's much easier to be initiated into this growth and healing period for all of us. And there are some people that still have income, still working, maybe at home, or, they're basically on what I call virus vacation because they still have income, but they don't have to work right now. And all of it is fine, and we don't have to. So I think that there's a lot of conversation right now that's good to be having of we don't have to be super productive right now. That's not necessarily what we're being called to do. We are being called to open and allow it to break us open even further, and for us to really face parts of ourselves that we haven't faced. And so the people that are bypassing all of it by either keeping themselves really busy or numbing out in all the ways that they want to, which, some of it's fine, some of it's normal and healthy to do. But, for example, playing video games through this whole thing, there's a missed opportunity to face yourselves in ways you really don't want to. And so my hope is that people will take this opportunity to face themselves, not just the ones that are having it thrust on them, but them too, because again, there's a lot of bypassing that can happen when that happens to us. Yeah. But to just spend a little time with yourself every day. Like sit in the nothingness and the unknown and the terror of it. Feel all the feelings and just be with yourself and really face the fact that life isn't going to go back to the way that it was before. Yeah. Things have changed and we don't know what that means yet. There's a lot of unknown. We don't know how long this is going to be. There's just so much there that is ripe with opportunity for us. It's not going to be comfortable and it's not going to be fun. But that is my hope, is that people will, in one way or another, take this opportunity to face themselves and to sit in the unknown long enough for it to start unraveling everything that they believe to be true about themselves and their life and the world just a little bit. And I know how painful that is, but it's so, so important. And there's so much good that comes from it.
Yeah. And I realized in your story and in your book, one thing that happened very early on in that sitting in it and feeling the feelings is that you started to uncover your new true purpose and your path. So talk to us about that. Like, what are the first steps to uncovering a true purpose and to understand and define your path?
Yeah, there's a lot to that. I will say allowing for the death and rebirth, which is kind of what we just talked about in the journey that you're on. So allowing yourself to be broken open by things, to let it get messy and let things fall apart. I think what is really, really challenging and was challenging for me for a long time in different ways at different points was to release our grip. We have this white knuckle grip to what's known and familiar, who we think we're going to be, and the path that we're on. And something that was really eye-opening for me, and I wrote about this in one chapter of the book, was going canyoneering in Zion. When I was just beginning to get my brain back, I was really just beginning to start healing in that first year after my loss. And the guide told us, I don't know if you're not familiar with canyoneering, it's like you're basically kind of rappelling down a canyon wall. And she said, as you go down, you're going to be following a path and you're going to try to stick to it. But at some point, you're going to start to feel gravity start to tug you. Gravity is queen. She's going to pull you to where you need to be. And if you resist that, it's just going to get harder and harder. And so you have to take your feet off the wall. And so I'm like, oh, cool, got it. I get on the wall. I start going down. And of course, I'm like, this is the path I'm going. It's what looks safest to me. It's what's most comfortable. And the guide hollers up to me, do you feel gravity? And I'm like, yep. And she's tugging me. And so I take my feet off the wall and I swing to where I'm supposed to be and I shimmy down the rest of the way with ease. And it just hit me over the head like, oh, that's what we need to do in life. And it's so hard because we have our sights set on a path and we need to have control and we need to know where we're going and we need things to be familiar and comfortable. But if we can just surrender and let what is happening shift the path and swing us in a different direction, it's going to be terrifying and it's going to be scary and we're not necessarily going to know the path, but it will have a level of ease that we don't have when we're just like, it must be this way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can totally resonate with that in my own life. I mean, you know, we're not in beyond the pandemic yet, but I have traversed a lot of ups and horrible downs in running my own business for the last 16 years. So there have been moments where I have white knuckle gripped something or tried to hold something so hard and tight, like it can't change ever. The reality is things change all the time. You can't. You have to. The second you surrender and you release that, your shoulders drop physically. You release into what is reality. And then that your brain chemistry changes to be able to even move towards acceptance and redefining.
Yes.
Because and I think that's the big part of it for me, at least.
And it's so important because life is always shaping us. And this is a big part of uncovering the purpose of our path and our greater purpose in the world. The core of our purpose is always present. I believe that wholeheartedly. It's hard coded into who we are, and we lose sight of it because of obligation and expectation in society and life.
Yeah.
As we're trying to uncover it, we have to allow for this unfolding and unraveling. We have to allow what's happening around us to shape us because the expression of our purpose changes with who we are and what we're doing and what's happening in the world around us. And if we're clinging to, this is my path, if I had clung to, I'm just going to get right back to where I was before my loss, I never would have created the body of work that I have. I wouldn't feel as clear on who I am and who I'm here to be. And I would be stuck and stagnant. I wouldn't have been able to be as successful as I am. But it took a lot of hard moments and a lot of not knowing what I was doing and a lot more loss to get to that place. So we really have to allow life to shape us, which requires a certain level of trust and also a lot of surrender.
Yeah, and it makes me also think the same applies in business, right? So when something changes in business, hello pandemic, and let's say you're a corporate event planner who plans trade shows and conventions and conferences, you have to surrender to what the reality is because all the events have now canceled for 2020, right? So it's being willing and open to pivot towards, okay, well, what do people really, really need right now? How can I shift what my business does to serve the greater good? So it requires
how can I take
that.
my gift and align it with the times?
There it is. Yeah. And it's to say, like, for the event planners that listen to the show, and I know we have quite a few, I am a firm believer that in-person conferences and events are going to come back in such a huge, beautiful way because we as humans need to be together. We love connecting in person. So that may come eventually. But what can you do now to pivot and, like you say, be of great service to others? Yeah. Is there anything else that we need to keep in mind when we're uncovering our true purpose?
Again, it's the same kind of thing, but allow it to unfold organically. Yeah. So you can have your vision, always have your vision, know what your desire is right now, what you're working towards, goals. All of that is so important. And know that as you move towards it, again, you're going to be shaped by what happens. You're going to learn new things. I never could have imagined my business for what it is now, after my loss, before my loss, even a couple years ago. Yeah. I had to set my sights somewhere and get really excited about that and start doing the work to move towards it in order to learn new things and meet new people. And so, again, being open to, you can't possibly know yet what your full purpose is and the full scope of it and where you're ultimately going to end up. So have your goals and your desires and work towards them, but be open to what might come because of it. And what goes on in our personal lives, like a pandemic, is going to shape our work as we go. And so just really allowing for that.
Yeah. And I think that there's a level of grace in that, right? So you have a vision. This is where you think you want to head next because you believe in your core strengths and your spiritual gifts and all the things. And so grace means that when you show up to the plate every single day to take another step, and another step, it's giving yourself that grace to follow where each step takes you. And it may not go the exact path that you thought, but you will eventually get there, whatever there is.
And also, I think it's important to remember that we have a goal and a vision, but we're not that person yet. And sometimes we personally have to go through things that shape us into the person who's able to have that. So we think if we follow our intuition and our desire and our vision, it's just going to be easy and magical. And it's supposed to sometimes completely destroy us in the process so that we can become the person that we need to be. So again, if you're moving towards something and it gets hard and messy and chaotic and crazy and it seems like everything's falling apart, you are being molded into who you need to be to create it.
And I can imagine, raise your hand now if you're listening to this episode and you're like, man, I do feel like I'm being destroyed right now, like literally destroyed. So we feel you, and, sending a Katniss 3-finger salute to you out in the world because it is just a lot going on. You talk about doing the impossible in your book. What does that mean?
I love this concept. Doing the impossible, anything that seems impossible to you only feels impossible because of the very winning strategies and ways of being you have developed to be safe, secure, and successful up to the point that you are now. So it's a total mind-bending experience. But basically, because of our subconscious programming, because of our upbringing, because of our attachment styles and personality types and core wounds, we have this winning strategy. We don't develop it. It develops us. And it allows us to basically compensate for what we believe is possible and impossible. And so all of the level, again, of the safety, secure, love, success that you have right now is because of this winning strategy. It's how you listen for things. It's how you respond to things. It's how you create. And so it's this powerful skill that we have until we want to do something that feels impossible. So that might be growing your business in a certain way. It might be making a certain amount of money, having a certain type of relationship.
Yeah.
Whatever feels impossible is only impossible because you need to step out of this winning strategy. And it's not about creating a new one. You have to step into a totally new way of being in the world, engaging with the world, a way of having conversation with yourself and others that moves you out of, well, I can only this is possible, so I have to compensate in these ways and I have to show up in these ways to be successful and at this level. You have to abandon everything that has gotten you to where you are now to go to that next level. And so I am fascinated by this process. I absolutely love it. It's one of those things that sounds super cool until you're in it, because again, when you start untangling your winning strategy, you are going against your subconscious programming that has kept you alive and successful.
Yep. Yeah.
And so I just think it's such an important set of skills for people to adopt, because there's always a next level and there's always something that feels impossible.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even think about any of the big, massive things that you've been able to accomplish in the last 5 years. 10 years ago, you probably thought, oh, well, that's the pie in the sky idea. I'll never be able to do that. Or how in the world is that going to happen? And you didn't know necessarily 10 years ago what you've actually accomplished in the last 5 years.
Right.
And it takes that, like you say, shifting of your mindset and going after doing the impossible. For me, doing the impossible, it's just like riding a bike. Before you started riding a bike, you fall down a lot. You got to put repetition into it and show up to the plate and do it every single day. And then a little bit gets easier and it gets a little bit easier.
And you have to be a person who rides a bike, even though you can't really do it yet. And that's one of the key things is we often think that we can't show up in a certain way until we reach the goal or have the things or whatever.
Yeah.
And how we close the gap and make the impossible possible and move it into reality is by showing up as that person now. So if I am the person that has the money and the business and the success and whatever relationship that I desire, I show up as her now. And it's not fake it till you make it. It is full embodiment, and how you engage with the world around you, the conversations that you have, the meaning that you choose to assign to things, like how you flow through the world changes. And that's how we close the gap more quickly. But we're often like, well, I need to get this way and I need to learn these things before I can do that. But that keeps pushing it further and further away and just wears us out.
Stephenie, you're a smart cookie. You are a smart cookie. So I would encourage anybody that's listening to this episode, definitely go pick up a copy of her book. It's called Unravel, Rising Up and Coming Back from a Season of Living That Damn Near Killed Me. Her name is Stephenie Zamora, and you can also find her on her website, Stephenie, that's with 2 E's, Zamora.com. We'll put all those links in the show notes as well. So one last question before we dive into the last section. Stephenie, what's your strategy to cope with and thrive outside of this pandemic? What's really working for you right now?
Always looking for the opportunity and possibility. And I think as business owners, we confuse that, which is not bad, with, what is the opportunity for my business? How can I show up and serve and change my offerings? That's all great too. But really saying, okay, I have been through enough really challenging chapters that have forced me to redefine who I am, to reorient to my own life and work and relationships. It's always, again, this opportunity to step more fully into who we're here to be and the work we're here to do. And so I am constantly like, okay, I stay very present and I show up and I do the work I have to do and I tend to my immediate needs and what's happening. And I don't think too much about it, but I'm very aware of, if my business fails because of this, what will I do? Mm-hmm. If it succeeds, that's a different story. But I think about the thing that we're most afraid of. The thing that I'm most afraid of is, again, my business is going to fail again because of the pandemic now. Yeah. What would I do? And I do it from a place not of something's bad and wrong, or I failed and it's going to be hard and struggle, but it's like, okay, if I had to start over, what would I do? And there's so much possibility in that, because it's non-attachment to, I don't want to lose what I have right now. It's okay if I am being shaped and life is unfolding and unraveling. being open to what comes next. And that helps keep me grounded. It doesn't mean that I don't have my moments of anxiety and spin out and freak out like everyone else, but it helps me remember that I'll just lean into what comes next and I'll figure it out step by step.
It's beautiful. So I have a few questions that I like to ask everybody. And again, thank you so much for sharing your beautiful brain with us today, because it really helps. I think that a lot of this is exactly what we need to hear right now to help bridge the gap to the next season of our lives. So, Stephenie, tell us what's one book that you're reading these days that's either inspiring you or poking holes and challenging your belief system?
Is the book that I have read over and over again. I'm reading again now, The Last Word on Power by Tracy Goss. So if you're interested in that conversation around doing the impossible, much of what I've learned comes from that book. And it's framed for executive reinvention for leaders who must do the impossible. But I think it's phenomenal for anybody who wants to do something impossible in their life. It challenges you like crazy.
Brilliant. Yeah, I've not heard about that book. So we'll put the link in the show notes for that one as well. So tell me, who's one person in your network, somebody that you know personally, you just feel is like up to brilliant things and we could shine a spotlight on them, and who knows, maybe one day we'll have them on the podcast.
Yes, Anik Aina. So she actually is my book launch manager and has become a dear friend. And I adore her because she's one of those people that is doing something that comes so easy and naturally to her that is like a blessing for the rest of us because it's so hard and complicated and scary. And she just brings so much joy and passion and full heart commitment to what she does. It's phenomenal.
So Anik and I know each other through B School. And so I would love to interview her on the podcast. So that's a great suggestion. I haven't had her on yet.
You should.
Yes, she is a bright light for sure. So I believe gratitude and simplicity go hand in hand. So tell me, what's one thing you're grateful for right now today?
I am so grateful for nature. Just being outside, whether it's a park or I'm blessed to be somewhere with trails and hikes all around me during this pandemic. But there's something about nature that just reminds us how connected we are to everything else and makes me feel so small and insignificant in the most powerful of ways. I'm so grateful for the outdoors right now.
Yeah, you and me both. So if somebody were wanting to connect with you online, where do you hang out? Is there one particular social media channel?
Instagram is probably the best because I love pictures and words. So Stephenie Z on Instagram. Yeah.
Okay, great. And then you also have a YouTube channel, so we'll put a link in the show notes for that for people to check that out also.
Perfect.
So my last question for you is this today. And again, Stephenie, I just want to acknowledge you. Thank you so much for sharing your story and writing this book. And I realize it's part of your healing process, but I imagine it's going to be part of a lot of people's healing processes
Thank you.
through the months and years to come. So thank you for being open. So someone somewhere right now is listening to this episode and she is feeling it. She is in the thick of something big and massive that is breaking her wide open, whether it's the pandemic or a massive breakup or, her business has crumbled and she's figuring out, what do I do now? What's one thing you could whisper into her ear in this moment just to encourage her?
You already know what is best and right and true for you. Work on that self-trust. Work on developing your relationship with your own intuition and your inner knowing, because everyone around you is going to have an opinion. There are plenty of experts with a lot of knowledge and experience. None of it matters. You are the only one who can discern what is right and true for you. And it's so important as you navigate what comes next. Trust yourself, and you already know who you are and who you're here to be. So just deepen the trust in that and you will do just fine.
Big love to you, Stephenie. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.